This is Speaking of Shakespeare, conversations about things Shakespearean. I'm Thomas Dabbs, broadcasting from Aoyama Gakuin University in central Tokyo. If you are joining us on YouTube, you should know that this program is also available on your favorite podcast platform. This talk is with David Sterling Brown of Trinity College, Connecticut. We will talk about his recent book entitled Shakespeare's White Others, and also about his recent and abundant contributions to the field of critical race studies. This talk is funded by the Aoyama Gakuin Information Media Center. This series has been maintained with support from the Aoyama Gakuin Institute of the Humanities and from the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science. David, welcome back to our program. It's so good to see you again.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be back.
I'm going to check my volume here and make sure that we're right. Listen, when a guy gets to be my age and I run across a younger scholar like you, I'm tempted to give advice, even though it is not asked for, unsolicited advice. And in your case, I can give you none because it's been 2 years since almost exactly 2 years since we talked before. I've never met you in person. I've had the pleasure of meeting you on Zoom. This is our second meeting. And in the 2 years, you were doing great when I talked to you last time, but you have done wonderful stuff in the past 2 years. And you're just on this wonderful trajectory. It's a joyful thing for me to see a scholar succeed in the way that you have. And I'm going to hand this to you and let you tell us about that. But you have a book that's just out entitled Shakespeare's White Others. And yes, I want to start with that. I think then we can get into your life and your what's happened over the past couple of years. But let's focus on Shakespeare's White Others. I've just finished it, and it's a very interesting theoretical position to take, because you're working within a history now of what we could call Black scholarship in Shakespeare, where you are talking about, one is talking about Blackness in Shakespeare, but you're focused on whiteness in Shakespeare. And so lead us into that, and we'll have it up there. And yet, thank you for showing us. Lead us into the types of work that you did before the book. I know you were at TRII, TRII, yep, and you were working on this. You've been working on this for some years, but just lead us into the theoretical position that you're taking here in this book.
Gosh, yeah. Well, I got to back up because immediately when you said lead us into it, I went all the way back to like graduate school. And
back.
My book, it's not a dissertation revision, which for me was an interesting process to have to confront when I realized that my dissertation was not actually going to be a good book. Yeah, David Bevington actually told me that, and bless his soul, because he was right. And Miller Riggio. And then my entire committee really kind of felt that way too. But then after that, I wrote something that I thought was going to be my first book, and that was called Black Domestic Matters. And I had the pages, as Arthur Little would say. I had pages, but I didn't have a book. And so once again, still didn't have a book. And that was 2019. And I was pretty devastated then, realizing that I had spent all this time since graduate school trying to come up with something else, and it just wasn't going to fly. And so between 2015 and 2019, I just kind of took a step back though and looked at my CV, and I was like, but I've done all this stuff. Like, I've been reading all this stuff. And so there's got to be something here that I can do to create a book. And that's where this came in, chatting with people, sending out my work to folks like, especially the Black Domestic Matters. I sent my introduction, I think, to like Kim Hall and Ayanna Thompson, and of course Arthur looked at the whole thing, and got some really good feedback that made me see how that vision wasn't aligned with the vision that I had for my career in terms of wanting to make a significant impact. And so when I came up with this Shakespeare's White Others concept, it was really inspired by both the plenary panel that Arthur Little did on, I think it was on whiteness. Was it on whiteness? He did something on white. He's done a lot of things. All right, I'm sorry, not plenary panel. It was his book, but he did mention the book in 2017 on a plenary panel, and he's got his book, which is White People in Shakespeare. And
Mhm.
that really shifted and inspired and influenced my thinking, to be quite honest. Working on that, I did a piece in his book called on Antony and Cleopatra. And once I did that, I just couldn't go back to anything that I had been working on before. And so what I saw in the plays and in the work that I'm doing is that there are these divisions between ideal and less than ideal whiteness that
Mhm.
reveal themselves in a lot of, well, actually all of the work, and even outside of the work, which is really cool. I'm very into soap operas, and I see this play out in The Young and the Restless and the Bold and the Beautiful as well. We could talk about that. Sheila Carter, and you know, I just sat back with that, and as I started going through the plays, and my favorite play, of course, Titus Andronicus, which I think I might have mentioned before, and I was like,
Yeah.
there's something more nuanced here than just this division between the Romans and the Goths and Aaron. I mean, Aaron is a pretty central figure in Titus, but he's one character out of many. And so that led me in that chapter, which I opened the book with, to ask this question: what is Titus without Aaron?
Mhm.
And then when you look at other plays, whether it's Othello, or of course, we can look at a play like Macbeth or Romeo and Juliet, there is no sort of Aaron-like or Cleopatra-like figure in those plays. It becomes a little easier to see the work in terms of less than ideal and ideal whiteness.
Mhm. Yeah, I thought started thinking about the Garden of Eden when you were talking about Aaron. And of course, Stephen Greenblatt has a book on Adam and Eve, but the whole notion of innocence, you cannot know good unless you know evil, right?
Right.
So you cannot see whiteness unless you have blackness, I guess is one of the points. But then the spectrums of whiteness that come out. And I really was interested in the Goths because from a straight historical standpoint, the Goths would be a little more northern than the Romans. But of course, we're in London, so the Goths are a little more barbaric and a little unwashed, and more than a little unwashed. And we have that perspective from Aaron. I think it's just brilliant stuff that you saw that we see that through Aaron, right?
Yeah, and these juxtapositions that happen between both, because there's a sort of split that you can make here in terms of thinking about whiteness and otherness. But then when you really sort of take the time to nuance that, what Shakespeare's done is set up something where we've got blackness, we've got whiteness, but then you can split whiteness up into ideal and less than ideal whiteness. So even if you take Aaron out of it, there are still these moments that require and necessitate this comparison to blackness in some way, even in the absence of a somatically black character, which I think
Okay.
it's pretty cool.
Yeah. It is cool. And of course, you feature too Macbeth, Richard III, and others, Iago, of course,
Yeah,
that who
that's
are,
my favorite chapter.
yeah, I'm teaching Othello right now. And I was thinking, of course, while reading your book, and there's Iago again, just endlessly interesting. And so these are examples of people who have seemed to been uh, what somehow have fallen away from the ideal whiteness. But you're also talking about a construct of whiteness that's been built within the language of the play, and I'm interested in you explaining the W.E.B. Du Bois quotation about sitting with Shakespeare, right?
Hmm.
And Shakespeare's untroubled by that. I forget the precise. It bothers him not,
Yeah,
or he
I
flinches
sit
not.
with Shakespeare and he winces not.
He
Yeah.
winces not. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite lines from Du Bois' The Souls of Black Folk, and which is very influential for my thinking in this book, as far as my connection with sociology is concerned. But I love that line because Du Bois takes the time to sort of elevate himself, for his audience. I mean, I think he knows he's great, obviously, but for his audience, he takes the time to elevate himself and sort of align himself with the greats, like Shakespeare, but then also acknowledging the distinction, but also the disruptions, the discord between Black and white, and showing us that in that moment when he says that line, which is a beautiful line of blank verse, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to him, doesn't matter to Shakespeare. And as I think about everything that's going on in the world right now, just a lot of tragic stuff that and sort of inhumane stuff that's happening. If people could sort of embrace that mindset, which I try to do in my work, I think it would make for both better thinking, both better operating as human beings, and just better living in general. So I really love that line. And it's actually been, I think, since like 2012, since I was in graduate school. It's the only quotation that I have at the bottom of my signature. So we're going on 13 years here with just that I sit with Shakespeare and he wins his not. Because even for me as a Black scholar, I'd like to think of that as something that can sort of frame my positionality in this Shakespeare world that we live in. And so if I were to amend Du Bois's line of verse in my own sort of, I don't know, ideal thinking, I would say that I sit with Shakespeareans and they went not, is what I would hope for my world.
Well, just to bring this up to date, because younger people may not remember the Jim Crow period. And of course, they don't remember the Jim Crow period if you date it to the end, in the mid 60s, but it didn't end in the mid 60s. Right. But there was a time where, and particularly when W.E.B. Du Bois is writing, where if you stay in the Black world, if you stay in the Plessy versus Ferguson separate but equal, the great lie, but the separate but equal world, if you stay in your world and you do what you want to do there, everything's fine. You cross over into the white world and you immediately see wincing. You immediately, and more than that, of course, horrible violence and whatnot, but right off the bat, wincing that you might not be quite as apparent today. So I just wanted to sort of bring that up,
Yes, no, and I remember we talked about that last time a little bit because my grandmother came up in Gaffney, South Carolina, and just the world that she grew up in and lived in, and it's definitely a different world now. As far as the wincing is concerned, I'd say there's less of it, but it still manifests, unfortunately, and sometimes in different ways. But again, I try to be optimistic and think that the little bit that I do, the little bit that you do, and a little bit that lots of people do in this world will hopefully amount to something that will continue to change minds and make things better.
Yeah. So in Shakespeare's White Others, there is your perspective from your experience reading Shakespeare. I talked with Ian Smith about this. He does a lot with hermeneutics and how there has been a kind of the word is just erasure. It had to exist before you erase it, but imagine something that it's just not there, and that's the Black hermeneutic and hermeneutical interpretation and so forth. And the point that we all bring our own experience, we all sit with Shakespeare, and yet we have a whole element of readership and critical reasoning that has been pushed, either not recognized, not seen, not even part of the whole picture, or pushed back on a good bit. And so you're coming up forward and saying, okay, let's look at this. Let's, in a sense, you're kind of looking in the mirror, right? And you're going and you're getting over into my world, into how white folks in the South where I grew up would distinguish between each other. We're not those kinds of people. And we're not talking about Black people. We're talking about white people. Yes. And at what point do you get to be those kinds of people? Some of them, of course, very, very poor, very underprivileged. That's right. Yeah. And some had money, right? But money didn't make you, I guess, white or whatever,
or white enough,
white enough. It may, you may not have had the right father or grandfather.
Yes.
And I remember my grandmother said those people are just no good. I had and I'm thinking, no, I like this guy. He's a friend of mine. And she's not from the right family.
Yeah, not from the right ilk. And I think that I love that example because it's one that exists outside of this book, outside of Shakespeare, and historically takes us back. And I mean, that still happens today, but that's exactly right. Like, there are these, and I saw it when I was growing up too, which is so interesting. There are these divisions that happen. And so I might have mentioned on our last call that I got the privilege of getting a scholarship to go to a predominantly white private school. But even in that environment, when I look back on it and I think about who were my friends, so who was friends with the black kid from South Norwalk, right? Like all these, and it's really interesting when I consider this concept of ideal and less than ideal whiteness, rather, to your point about what you were saying from the South.
Yeah. And oh, by the way, I wasn't from any kind of well-to-do, wealthy family or anything. It's just that there were people who felt that they had, I guess, better manners. Something if you got right down to it, and reasonably well educated or whatnot. But this goes into Shakespeare, and you see it in English class society in the 16th century and well beyond. And you remark on that. Let's get a couple of more examples. We can't do the whole book, but let's go to Othello or something. Yeah, why not? I want to do White Hand too, but again, but let's talk Iago, Othello, that kind of stuff, and let us know what to expect.
So Iago, so that's my favorite chapter in the book, as I said, and I again love that book, or that play. So much has been said about Othello, and I think working with Keith Hamilton Cobb and the Untitled Othello Project just kind of made me sit with the play for a very long time. And as I looked at it, again, I was trying to think about how can we reframe people's thinking about this play, which, yes, it's toxic and it's all those things, but a lot of what we see in the world is, as far as entertainment is concerned. And so I was really interested in trying to manifest in a book chapter the work that I was doing with Keith and the Untitled Othello Ensemble.
Keith Hamilton Cobb.
Keith Hamilton Cobb,
the actor, yes.
Which was to get people. So I guess I'll back up and say, so a point that I made as the dramaturg for the Untitled Othello project at one point was that I feel as though, given all of the misogyny and the racism in that play that is required for actors to reproduce on a stage and internalize, I just can't see how Othello is not a play that is just as hard for white actors to perform as it is for the black actor who plays Othello. So that's kind of how I entered into this, because if you're really taking the time to sit with owning the racism, whether that's being the victim of it or being the perpetrator, that has to be hard. And if it's not hard, then you're not really either sitting with it enough, or there's a reason that it's that easy for you. And so, yeah. And so just to make it plain. And so when I got into this chapter, I really wanted to sort of tease out the elements of Iago's character that sort of would make somebody not want to say the things that people usually say about him, which is, he's an evil genius, or he just these sort of complimentary statements that don't get at the heart of who he is as a character and what he does in terms of damaging this domestic relationship, both in terms of Desdemona and Othello, but then the domestic relationship between Othello and the state of Venice as well.
Yeah. He seems genius to perhaps because he thinks the unthinkable, right?
Yeah.
All right. So kudos to the reader who might mistake that for genius, because I still think that most of us are good, that we have to be turned into bad somehow. Yeah. And so most people can't just say, listen, they're just people like that out there. When I teach younger people, most of whom are, from good homes or whatnot, or in a safe society, they can't see that there's that kind of evil out there, and they can be mistaken for genius. But I was teaching just at the beginning, there is no holding back in Iago from the beginning of that play.
Right.
To get into the minds of the white senator, the animal imagery, the standard what must have been just solid locker room racist language when, let's say, one of them was not around, right?
Right.
The kind of language that I would have heard in the
Yeah.
locker room, you see, and there you are. It's not genius; it's evil, but it looks
Yes.
like genius
Yeah.
because we are so vulnerable to that kind of thing. All
We
of
can.
us.
Yeah, we definitely can be. And when we attach that genius to the evil, it kind of minimizes how dangerous, that descriptor of evil really is, because it's still evil, even if it's evil genius, right? It's still evil, but to add genius to it, I think is sort of complementary in a way that creates this paradox that makes it, because I've had actually some students, I'll be like, who's your favorite character in the play? When they say Iago, I'm just like, please explain.
Oh yeah, oh
you
yeah.
know?
I think that's why Branagh chose to play him.
Okay.
You know, in that production with Lawrence Fishburne, because
Yeah, that's a good
you
one.
know what a challenge for an actor who's done all these other roles to just do Iago, right? Uh, well, all right, let's move on. Let's do White Hands. And you put together Cleopatra, and it made me think of some things, but I will talk about that. Tell us about the White Hand first.
Yeah, so I mean, the white hand is a trope that goes back to so much in literature, including medieval literature. But I was very interested in that, and I have to thank again Arthur Little for the opportunity to contribute to white people in Shakespeare, because that's that chapter in that book. It sort of was the foundation of this chapter in my book,
Mm-hmm.
and I was really interested in the way that Shakespeare presents Cleopatra as his Cleopatra, as Black. I was really interested in the moment in the middle of the play where Cleopatra's hand is touched or kissed by a servant from Rome, and Antony just gets incensed in that moment, and he berates the servant figure for touching the white hand of a lady. And when you close read the language in that play and you put it in the context of this moment, and just look at, for example, when is the term lady used in the play? It's only used in reference to one of Antony's wives, for instance, and I think that's before it's said in reference to Cleopatra. So already we get a definition of what a lady is. So a lady is white, a lady is Roman, and there's like this conversion that happens in that moment in the play when Phidias, I believe that's the name of the servant, he touches the hand of Cleopatra, who has up until this point been referred to and thought of as Black. And so I was just really interested in thinking through again what's happening there in that play with respect to the identity of Cleopatra, and how her shifting, or at least Antony's shifting of her from sort of Black to white, is a matter of convenience for him in that moment to make a particular point about protecting whiteness and white femininity in particular. And I mean, the chapter itself centers on Antony when we think about him as being this sort of less than ideal white figure. But again, in order for that to happen, right, there are these connections and associations that have to occur between him and Egypt, or him and Cleopatra. Mm-hmm. Which again then sort of devalues his whiteness, so to speak, as many of the characters in Rome comment on. So
yeah, devalues his whiteness. There's a value to whiteness, and I think that, you know, I want to kind of intervene a bit on this in the sense that if you are, let's say, the white reader, right, identify as there's not in my reading of this is not a critique. There's not a voice coming back at you saying you're a bad person. They're saying maybe you haven't seen it quite this way. let's just take it from this position and look at it this way. And in doing so, let's see if rather than create differences, let's see if we can resolve differences. Yes, there are differences, but then there's the idea that if we begin to understand these divisions and ourselves, right? And I think that's probably a prominent theme in your work so far, is that to understand the other, there is the need to understand the self, right?
Absolutely. I mean, Toni
And
Morrison says that in
right.
The Origin of Others.
Yeah, and yeah, that comes out of that, and you point to the fact that there, it is, I think, let's just use the word sinful to try to compare white experience with Black experience, particularly from where I'm from. But the fact is, as you said before, everybody loses. And when I look at the history of depression in the South, it's in the novels. It's in the novels of Walker Percy, who's about as white or right. He's funny, he's good, but his own father committed suicide with a shotgun, his own and grandfather. And it's throughout his novels, it's throughout Southern literature, it's throughout Southern life. And at one point, you wonder, where does this malaise that leads, where does it come from? Could be something completely biological and unrelated, but I, being a Shakespeare teacher in Japan, my expertise in this goes only that far. I think that there is a type of mental illness, and of course, mental and physical is hard to separate. There's a kind of mental illness that's part of the history of racism that you cannot hold on to this kinds of false consciousness and this kind of cruelty, right? Because most people aren't that cruel, and it gets you on some level,
I mean, as you were talking, I mean, the first word that entered my mind was trauma. Just the trauma that gets either transferred or because there's a book I cite in Shakespeare's White Others, which definitely deal with mental health as well, but The Body Keeps Score. And it's all about how our bodies remember and retain. And these sort of experiences, whether it's emotional experiences or psychological or physical, I mean, because even physical harm done to the body, I mean, you get the scars that literally will be reminders of that. That trauma, if it's not dealt with appropriately and accordingly, it doesn't actually go anywhere, and it manifests in the world and in our actions in various ways.
Yeah. Well, I could talk with you about this for this next several days. You'd have to break maybe to get something to eat and sleep, but I could talk forever about this. But I think we've kind of shown what the book is about. We want to encourage people to get it and consider it, read through it. And it's a joy to read, and I love how you embrace the community of scholars that you have been working with, and well, they're scholars who get out and sort of want to make it all look like they just popped in, and in their chariot or whatnot, and they're to save the world. But you show us part of the experience of reading your book is you get the sense of now the history of Black scholarship on Shakespeare, and your gratitude to the people who mentored you. And we're talking about mentorship now in a sense that you have found yourself a home at Trinity College, and this is the second. You are the guy who returned. If you remember the old program called Welcome Back, Cotter, the guy who returns to his neighborhood after college. But after college, you went off and explored the world a bit, and you're back at Trinity College. And let's talk about. Let's see. Yeah. Yes, your own professor's successor. You are this is like the succession. You are the next one. You are the yes
dynasty going on here.
Yeah, you have the crown now.
Yeah, it's too bad. If I had known you were going to say that, I would have had my crown ready. I do have one. But yeah, and actually, as I move into that and thinking about Trinity, which is just my beloved alma mater that I can't seem to get away from, I want to mention one thing about the book that I don't think I said, because it's very relevant to this, which is the book is also very personal.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of personal elements in it, both as it pertains to my mother, my father, and my sister. But I conclude the book with a letter that I wrote in 2002 to the mayor, police chief, and police commissioner of my town in Norwalk, Connecticut, when I was being racially profiled on my own street. And the reason I mentioned that in relationship to Trinity is because those incidents started happening only a few days after I got my acceptance letter to Trinity as an undergrad. And so this sort of bright spot in December, because I applied early decision to Trinity, this bright spot of both getting into the only college that I ever applied to, but also it was Christmas time. So it was like a very happy, I honestly considered my acceptance to Trinity as like the ultimate Christmas gift, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
In 2002, and then these or actually that was 2001 rather, but then these moments started happening where I was almost scared that I wasn't actually going to get to live out that dream. And so I wanted to mention that because I used that letter as the impetus for writing the book. I knew that I wanted to honor that voice of that 18-year-old self, and figuring out how to get there through Shakespeare was the goal. And so Trinity has been like a saving grace for me. As you said, I am my undergraduate Shakespeare professor's successor. And I started last year, so that I'm in my second year at Trinity on the I was going to say on the tenure track, but that's not true because I got tenure. So
you're there.
Yes. So I earned tenure this past spring. And so, yeah, I'm in my first semester as an associate professor at Trinity, and it's just been really amazing.
Yeah. Well, what a beautiful place. You can see it online. The beautiful pictures there is what it looks like. And you are there with people who have helped foster you both as an undergraduate, but you apparently didn't make any enemies there because you have friends when you were, when they want you back, that means something, right?
And I mean, I've had a sort of revolving door relationship with Trinity, which has been interesting because, I recruited there and that wasn't a Trinity thing, but I just happened to be the Connecticut recruitment director for Teach for America, which had me at Trinity for 2 years from 2007 to 2009. And then I had a pre-doctoral fellowship at Trinity in 2013 to 14. So I was on the for a year, and I didn't want to leave then. And so I was sad to be quite honest. But everything I believe happens in its time when it's supposed to. And so this opportunity to be here and feel just so supported by my colleagues, by my students. Trinity is special in that regard because I have literally been through almost everything that these students are going through. I know the world changes, and so as things evolve, there will be some differences, but I try to present myself in such a way that allows every student I come into contact with to see themselves in me somehow, some way.
Yeah. Well, I've talked with people who are about teaching on this series, and it's a little bit different than when I went to college. When you went to particularly a place like Trinity or went to a fine college, you tended to get over on the side of town where the grass was cut. Everything, the garbage truck showed up and picked up everything. If somebody, we laughed at our college, somebody spray painted it was a football rivalry, and they spray painted our academic building, one of the academic buildings. It was cleaned up within a day, that kind of thing, but the thing is now is that you run into many more undergraduates who are in these kinds of schools who the family fabric has not held up, and this is across races and so forth. They are and they are dealing with these astonishingly rapid changes in the way the technological world has influenced their lives, the social networking, all of the above and below,
and the pandemic.
Man, that was just when we went back to face teaching, I was thinking, my goodness, I had students who just broke out talking in the middle of class to each other and not paying any attention to me. And I said, let's just let that horse run.
Yeah.
They haven't seen each other in over
Yep.
2 years. And,
Yep.
so, we can talk about anything you want to. You want to talk about K-pop instead of, much ado about nothing. Let's go K-pop. I'll figure a way to tie it together. But that was good. That was therapeutic, but it was very traumatic period for all of us, of course. But these kids, so they don't come in, even in a place like Trinity. Not you're not dealing with the student body that what is it? The Leave It to Beaver kid, Wally Cleaver coming in, from his perfectly well-adjusted white suburb or whatnot. There's much more variety in there, much more that you have to mediate as a teacher.
Yeah, no, it's especially last year, because I came back, so I came into Trinity off a fellowship year, which my pandemic experience was pretty interesting because I was on leave when I was on a fellowship when the pandemic started. And so I never had to deal with the transitions to online teaching. I only had really, I think, 2 semesters of that after everybody had gotten adjusted to Zoom teaching. So my experience was pretty unique. But when I got into the classroom last fall and just started seeing things, all of the students were in different places because depending if they were a, college or high school freshman, right, when this pandemic started versus a high school junior, or if they were a college freshman when this started, their sort of sense of how to operate in this environment or even just in an educational space was drastically different from each other, which meant differentiating my teaching style for all of them required a lot more work because I don't believe that there's one size fits all model to teaching, which I stand by that. But man, was that harder last year because even in a class where I only had, I think, 18 students, which isn't a lot compared to what I used to have at other schools, to see how my first year students just really were sort of behind the curve in the sense that what I knew and understood of what was expected of me as a college freshman, no clue. They had no clue. I remember actually this one moment in my intro to literature course, and my students said, because they had essays due every Tuesday, and the student said, "So what do you want us to say?" And I was like, I said, I don't understand the question. And they were like, well, in high school, our teachers would just tell us what they want us to say. And I'm like, and so I said to the rest, I was like, is this true for all? And they were like nodding. And I said, oh God, I was like, okay, so that's where we're starting. I was like, please don't do that in this class. And so really getting I would call it getting acclimated to sort of
Acclimated. Yeah.
post and or not even post pandemic teaching, but I guess just being face-to-face teaching, like getting acclimated to the resuming face-to-face teaching was definitely challenging. And I would say I was pretty exhausted by the end of my first semester, and it had everything to do with just how hard everyone's lives have been.
Yeah. Yeah. I've gotten more notes, of course, just like any college or university, we have now a set place where students who have emotional problems can go and work it out, and their teachers are notified privately that they may have suffered from depression or some other thing, maybe have poor eyesight, something like that, a disability. But there's been more of that in the terms of in the depression department. Now, I wouldn't say it's skyrocketed, but I would say if you had 2 students or notified about 2 students, now it might be 4. So there's a definite increase. Who feel functionally unable, maybe, to come to class some days.
Yes.
Yep.
Yep.
Get out of bed.
I've seen that as well. And so, I try to be sensitive to that. And also trying to help the students along in terms of getting them to recognize that um, while we can sort of, I don't even want to use the word accommodate, but I'll use accommodate for lack of a better word, accommodate their challenges. We can't coddle them, because at a certain point, hopefully within the 4 years that's expected of them to graduate, they're going to have to enter the real workaday world.
That's right.
And this type of negotiation of what is expected of me is not going to work in that space.
No, it won't. Well, that's it. That's where you are now. But it's a good place.
Yeah.
It's a good place to be. I will say, probably in your experience, in my experience, we tend to focus on what. Well, it's biblical. You focus on the lost sheep, right?
Yes.
The sheep who, the people who do everything and do the homework and so forth. Well, okay, we don't see it, and instead we see that one kid who's wondering how to reach that one kid. And sometimes it's more than one and so forth. And I guess that's the way it should be. We should be thinking of ways to reach out and bring everybody into the fold, even though it probably will never succeed. There's probably always going to be one. Yeah.
And it doesn't hurt to try. I actually recently at Trinity, speaking of where I am now, so 2002 I started, so 21-year history with this college, and Trinity
Wow.
has always had a counseling and wellness center on campus. And as a student, I never stepped foot in it. And yeah, just an aversion to, I guess, mental health back then. And so recently I decided my class was doing a field trip. And so we went to the center, and had the director, who's a Trinity alum. She showed us around. She gave us a tour and answered questions. And I thought, as somebody who is very interested in sort of promoting wellness and mental health, I thought it was necessary for me to do something for my students that wasn't done for me as a Trinity student, but also because I see so much need, as you're talking about, among our students today. It was very important for me that they know that I really do support they're going to the center if they need
Yeah.
to. And so what better way to do that than
Of
take
course.
them there?
Yeah.
But
Well,
it may
listen.
not be them who needs to go. Maybe they have a friend who needs to go. And now that they know, they could walk their friend down there, as the director
Of
said.
course, of course. My mother was a psychiatric social worker, and so we were in a family that was a little bit different in the sense that we were open to that. But I want to come back to that. That's down on my list of things to talk about in terms of your personal life. But I really, really want to get to, and anyone who's listening by podcast, we're going to put up some, some art, VR art gallery, exhibition, related writings or write-ups, write-ups from Trinity and the Folger and Cambridge University Press by you, David Sterling Brown. And you're doing a book reading and VR exhibition demo at Trinity. Now, by the time we won't get this up in time, but by the time this is up, this would have been during your homecoming, but I'm assuming that there might be another opportunity. So let's talk a little bit about the VR art gallery and where people, if they can't see what we're showing here on YouTube, where they might be able to find it online. Other than this program, you can come right here and see it, but it's part of it. But the whole thing, yeah.
Yeah, so my work with the Racial Imaginary Institute was, and I'm still a part of that, the Institute actually, as a curatorial team member, but it was really inspiring to just kind of step away from the books, so to speak, and immerse myself in this world that involves thinking about art or engaging with just everyday people about issues that matter, in the grand scheme of things. And so I initially wanted to do like an art exhibition, but of course, because pandemic was making in-person stuff challenging, I had to think outside of the box. And so I ended up doing some research, and I discovered that there are people who create virtual reality art exhibition or virtual reality anything, really. Like the person I worked with, for instance, she could literally take your office right now and turn that into a virtual reality space that would look exactly like it does, and then we could meet in your office virtually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, very cool. Very
Well,
cool.
I'm
Very
going to have to move the bottle of whiskey I have back here. I'm joking. I really don't have one, but it's a good joke. I couldn't let that go by.
But yeah, so I started thinking about this in 2021 and started working on it, I think, in maybe fall of that year when I reached out to this woman and Francesca Albresi. And then I came up with a concept for it. And what I really wanted to do was help people, especially the general public, both see how they could apply the concepts in Shakespeare's White Others to art. Because as you know, we've talked about, you just applied it, which I think that just made my day, actually. You applied it to like the relationships that you saw in the South. And here I am thinking about the relationships that I see happening on The Bold and the Beautiful and the Young and the Restless. So like, we don't need Shakespeare to apply these concepts.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
You know, the art gallery is this space where you can enter at any time. It holds up to 50 people. And so you get an avatar and you can go inside the gallery space and check out the art, which there are 39 pieces from the Folger Shakespeare Library. So shout out to the Folger for letting me use art from the collection that they have. But the space is, I guess, let me describe the space. So it's a building, you know, like it is a gallery. It's a building. It has 5 rooms. And so the first room is the welcome room. There's an acknowledgements wall. There's also a key concepts wall. So there I'm just giving visitors a general overview of the concepts from the book that they will then take into the gallery's art rooms. There's also a stage in it. So in this space, I can hold class in this space. I can hold talks in this space. You and I could actually be doing this interview in that space. And I could see you in this space too. So you have the ability to throw up, just like you see here in Zoom, you can throw up your screen so that I can see you and you can see me in real time, or you could be, again, your avatar. But then the really cool thing, which I only got to experience this, so I'm like behind in my own art gallery world. The first time 2 weeks ago, I went into the gallery with VR goggles because you can do that as well. And it was mind blowing. The ceilings are like, I don't know, they're like 25 feet high. And everything looks real. So the rooms, let's see, the second room, third room, and fourth room, they're dedicated to the art. So the first room, as far as the art is concerned, is the White Other. So again, taking the concept from the book, having people look at the art and see if they can identify in the art the White Other figure, think about how it's operating. The next room is the White Other and the interracial color line. So then again, adding that second concept from the book and complicating it a little bit with newer artwork. And then the third room, as far as the art is concerned, is Hamlet. It's called, so it's called Code Black. And we're really in that space thinking about how to map onto the artwork. And actually on the cover of the book is Hamlet and Gertrude. And so mapping onto the artwork, the concepts from the book, so people can then think about how they work in a particular play.
Well, this is just fabulous that you can do this. Now, I've recently spoken with Steve Wittick at Carnegie Mellon. And they're doing Shakespeare in VR. So I think you probably run across Stephen Wittick. He recently came to Tokyo.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, and did a little talk here at our university. So
I was actually thinking earlier, I was like, are you coming to any conferences? I was like, I've never met you in person.
I know. I don't think I'll make it's so poorly timed for our schedule, the Shakespeare Association, but maybe one of them. We'll figure it out.
But funny that you mentioned Stephen Wittick, because so he has his I believe Shakespeare in Virtual Reality book with David McInnes. And in the final room in the gallery, it's called the Pedagogy and Research Resource Room. And so I have a bookshelf there. And so their book is actually on the wall.
Oh, good. Because David also has been on the program, and he's one of my favorite people
Yeah, he's such a nice
along
person.
along with you and also Stephen. And I just like the just the work that you all. It's a I get a sense of a new generation coming in, and it's a damn good generation.
Oh, thanks.
There's no, people might be, oh well, they're just not as good. The kids today, right? I don't
Yes.
feel that way at all. I don't feel that way even with the vast majority of my students, even though they have had to suffer a pandemic and so forth. I think that
Yeah.
the future could very possibly be very, very good in our field and across the board and so forth.
I think so. And I think that, I think our students, as we think about the future, they're certainly the defining feature of that.
Yeah, yeah,
And I should mention too, one thing about the last room in the gallery, in addition to the bookshelf, there are 5 video art analyses that my Trinity students did.
yeah,
And so they're looking at art from the gallery and thinking about how just not only the concepts from the book are applicable, but how that art is functioning within the overall gallery space.
yeah, yeah. I want to include a couple of women in here too. Heidi Craig, who's part of our series at the University of Toronto, who
Right.
does historical cultural research, sort of material research, a very brilliant scholar, um, and Lucy Monroe at King's
Oh,
College,
yes.
who has done some fine work and so forth. I'm trying to think of people maybe roughly in the same age group who will be very soon. Very soon it will be you. You will be the senior, and by very soon, you get to a certain age and you go to sleep at night, and a year goes by. So this is the future coming on. I remember seeing in fact, I still think I have the magazine where they were talking about the next generation of Hollywood movers and shakers. And Quentin Tarantino had just done Reservoir Dogs, and Lawrence Fishburne, the young Lawrence Fishburne, was in there in a group of, and they were quite right in their choices, even pre Pulp Fiction. So. That's where I think things are going. Now, you have related Elsinore with Compton. You conflated those two ideas. So, in a book number 2 here, Hood Pedagogy, and that's CUP also. So that's in the works.
Yes.
All right,
I should,
Hood Pedagogy. We don't have a title page yet, but we'll maybe throw it HOOD Pedagogy. Very
yeah.
interested in hearing about that.
And that's so funny that we're talking about that because I just chatted with my editor about it today.
Okay.
So Hood Pedagogy, and the full title is Hood Pedagogy, Teaching Shakespeare from Within. I'm very interested, obviously, in pedagogy. As I mentioned, both, I think my work tends to split between pedagogy and also what some people think of as research. So I think it's all research, and to me, it's just one sort of synergistic thing. But Hood Pedagogy is really about how, in order to be student-centered, rather, I believe we actually need to be faculty-centered. And what I mean by that is I'm no good to my students if I'm no good, right? And so when I think about what it means to teach Shakespeare from within, I'm bringing into that both the history of my own self, but also in terms of Hood, I'm thinking about just Hood as in that sort of short abbreviation for neighborhood. So how the place, and we did talk about this a little bit when I was with you before. My
Yeah.
love for Titus, right? It comes from,
Love
or my
for love for what again?
Titus Andronicus, Shakespeare. Yeah,
Titus. Love for
yeah.
Titus.
So
Okay.
Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus. It comes from the sort of familiarity that play gives me in terms of how it reminds me of just where I grew up. Like, it's familiar. There was violence. There was all kinds of things that don't scare me, so to speak. And so what I realized, though, perhaps after having that conversation with you, to be quite honest, is that those experiences and that the sort of nurturing of my environment shaped me. And if every pedagogue took a second to think about how what they do is shaped by where they come from,
Mhm.
I think it would maybe help people see how unique their teaching either is or really could be.
Mhm.
Or, and I don't want to give too much about of the book away, or the sort of gaps in their teaching.
Yeah.
You know, because hood is also not just this sort of feel good term in terms of where we come from. I'm also thinking about the sort of iconic hood of the KKK hood, for instance, and white supremacy,
Oh, yeah.
and so how that impacts
Mhm.
people in the classroom and educational spaces in higher education, and of course in the world. And so there's
Mhm.
a double meaning there as I think about hood pedagogy. And I'm excited to get that short book out into the world once I get it completely out of my head.
Well, you let the genie out of the bottle a bit here now with me because it's just blowing up. I did not make the association with the Klan, but that what a brilliant symmetrical way to bring around one term and how that term can be encoded,
Mhm.
encrusted with meaning.
Yeah.
It could even wrongfully used be one of those dog whistle words, and not even a very loud dog whistle. I mean, like a lower pitch, and there it runs right across over to the worst kind of hate, the worst kind of hatred, organized hatred, and so. Um, uh, I think you really have you've gotten a hold of something there. That's something that sticks. It has that a bonding agent that
Oh,
sticks around.
thanks.
Yeah, and so well done. And out of Cambridge too. That's going to be. I can't wait.
Yeah. And
And
that's inspired by Mickey Kendall's work, Hood Feminism, which I have an article. It's an article where I do kind of touch on this dual meaning of hood in that
yeah,
piece, but it'll be really teased out in the book.
yeah. Oh, well done. Um, All right. So I think we'll have this up in time for the Trinity event with Claudia Rankine. That will be in November, mid-November. You are now a full-time curatorial team member of Claudia Rankine's Racial Imaginary Institute. And as a result of the ACLS Mellon Scholars, the fellowship that you won, and we talked about a couple of years ago, and the Society Fellowship, yes, we discussed. So I'm reading my notes here. Sorry, guys, but anyhow, there's so much there, David. And the thing that I wanted to focus on here is I just finished a talk with Jean-Christophe Mayer of the Paul Valéry Montpellier III University in southern France, and he's part of an institute that does what we traditionally have called cross-cultural research, cross-disciplinary research, and he prefers the term transdisciplinary research, where I think that's suggesting a more fluid movement between what we consider specialties. You and Shakespeare, you and race studies can move into art and the VR, and then this Racial Imaginary Institute. This is not specifically any particular writer, but it's a lot of things and works across there. So explain a little bit of something about that. You have it listed here.
Yeah. So you asked me to explain the Racial Imaginary Institute.
Well, we did it last time. Well, let's
Oh,
do it again. In case you didn't. Let's start with TRII and move out and talk about what's. Let's move it up from 2 years ago to now. How about that?
oh, sure. So it's an interdisciplinary think tank, and it includes a bunch of different folks like Monica Yoon, who's a poet, as well as Claudia Rankine's husband, John, who is a filmmaker, and Emily Skillings, who's also a poet and teacher. There is a lawyer, a psychoanalyst on the curatorial team as well, and a bunch of different folks from different backgrounds. And The goal of the Racial Imaginary Institute is pretty simple. It's getting people to think about race. I think the sort of I always forget what that word is that I'm trying to come up with, but our sort of collective mission is that no sphere of life is left untouched by race. And when I read that, you know, two and a half, or actually I guess it was 3 years ago, 2020, I really got inspired because I think that's so true. And if we're really committed to this idea of no sphere of life being untouched by race, then that means that we have a responsibility to think about, in any sphere of life, how is race operating? How is racism operating? How is it functioning? And what can we do to contribute to the sort of betterment of situations? And so the Institute puts together programs. Like last year, we had a symposium. It was a 3-day symposium in New York City where we focused on this overarching theme of the fragility of we. And there were speakers who came in. It was just a really great opportunity to get anyone who was interested. These events are free. So anyone who was interested in being a part of the conversation, getting them into the conversation and creating space for that.
Yeah. Well, it is just wonderful, wonderful work. My mind, I'm trying to hold things in here because so much is getting triggered by the idea of, well, let me start with Ian Smith's comment that he had spoken to a person in Shakespeare who wanted to insist that Othello was not about race. It's kind of like that's where we're going to start. We can't start the negotiation, the debate here.
And you know what? Othello's not about gender either. Then how about that?
That's right. It's not a play.
Yeah.
We got to pick another starting point here. And I had a friend years ago. I remember a story from years ago. The guy was from Mississippi. He married a Mexican national. He went to graduate school at a major Southwest university. I won't mention because I don't want to reflect this. It's actually a very fine school. And he was in sociology. And one of the students there wanted to interview him about being from Mississippi and being white from Mississippi, and was just curious about why people were so racist in Mississippi. It's really the basis of that. And he got around. He said, "Well, there are a lot of things. There's the constant propagation of stereotypes. It just is endless. These people are that, and these people are that. Da 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 da." And he said, it's a bit like here in the Southwest, where the way people view Mexicans, and that kind of thing, where you place a lot on there. Now they just had a party the night before, and they hadn't cleaned up, and this guy had shown up early in the morning, and his living room was a little bit of a mess. And the person interviewing him said, "Well, about those people, if you let too many into your neighborhood." And started going on about people of Latin background, let's say, either American citizens or and he said, you're right. I married a Mexican, and look at my living room. It's just a mess here. I just asked the guy to leave. But I have been all over the world, and I have never been to a place that didn't have this. On some level, on some degree, yep. and with many, many great people. But wherever you go in the world, you see it. Maybe another group, it's maybe another level of it, but it's always there. It's everywhere, and I think that's what TRII is bringing forward.
And I think, that's another way to sort of think about what I'm doing in the book too. What you just said, another level of it. Like there's levels to whiteness, for instance, and that's what I'm thinking about in the book. But the othering, like it always seems to have to happen for whatever reason, and nothing ever really good seems to come out of it.
Nothing good. There's never anything good.
I know all about the Southwest because of my time, on the faculty of the University of Arizona. I saw it there too. So you're absolutely right. It just, as I talked to Arthur a lot, and as he explains, like it just looks different. He's like, because when I moved to University of Arizona in Tucson, I honestly thought, like, oh my gosh, because it's different and I just didn't understand the dynamics of it, I wasn't seeing how the racism or the prejudice was playing out as clearly as I'm able to where I grew up. And
Yeah.
once I was there long enough, I was sadly mistaken. I
Yeah.
would say. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, when I was in graduate school in California, and I was in Pomona, in the Claremont colleges there, and I was with a Yugoslavian poet, a Fulbright scholar, who he and I liked to go out. We were young. We liked to go out and have a drink or two and talk about poetry. But we managed to. He managed to get together enough money to buy a car back then that was already 10 years old. You know, it was a mess of a car, but it ran. And you need a car in Southern
That's all
California.
that
You know,
matters.
yeah, that's a big problem if you don't have one. So we were out and we were talking and so forth, and got hungry, and it was late at night, maybe 12, and we drove down to a restaurant just about a less than a mile away from the school, and pulled in. And I said, I don't have any money. Graduate student. He said, I don't have any either. I said, well, Hamdi, I don't think we're going to be able to get breakfast here. They don't serve free breakfast, so we have to go back and scare up whatever we can, in the dorm room. And I pulled, and it just suddenly was Christmas time behind me. I mean, the whole rack was going, and I pulled over, and I'm thinking I can pass, the alcohol test here, but golly gee, seems pretty dramatic. And then another unit came in sideways, pulling in sideways, and I looked, and the guy had a shotgun. He was behind the door, and he chambered around and had it at the back of my head. And I had my hands up. Going back to the white hand, there's a crossover there. At that moment in your life, you don't want anything in there that would trigger this guy.
Right, right.
What happened was the night before, a group of people had robbed that restaurant in the same make and model of car and color.
Oh, so
and they were
mistaken.
staking out the restaurant, and we pull up in that car and then pull out. And I go, this is how quickly something can go wrong. And if you don't,
Yes.
and there's me, white guy and so forth. If I do something wrong at that moment, who knows what happens? But
Right.
it's it's an experience that if you say, okay, kind of, I get it now, but people need to see that, wherever you are. I'm in there talking about mowing the lawn, and the Claremont colleges, it's beautiful there, but you get off, in many American universities, you get right off campus, and you're in the world. So
Yes.
I think that's just how wonderful the work is there. But let's see, book number 1 promo and mini tour. All right, so you developed unique strategies for promoting your book. I hope I'm part of that. I hope we get a lot of people. I'm going to try to send out to as many people as I can. Love to. So let's highlight the resource for Shakespeare's White. We don't do enough of this, David, and it bothers me a little bit, because I have people like you, like Stephen. I would say more of I was younger. Some you guys maybe don't feel as young as you actually are. You guys, and all people, guys, I'm using it in a genderless way, do better at it than people, let's say, closer to my age, because you are more connected. And so let's talk about promotional and mini book tour.
Yeah, no, I've just been so one, I just have to say, like, working with Cambridge has been so great, because like Ian Smith's book, actually, my book was awarded the academic impact designation. So they're doing marketing a bit different. That's why the cover doesn't look like a standard academic book. It's very much I won't say wild, but it's eccentric, like me. And so one thing that I came up with, because I'm really interested in my community, and like, I still live in Norwalk. I still live in South Norwalk, Connecticut. I'm very interested in my community having access or interest in what I do, and especially my parents. And so Let's see, where do I start? I don't know. One thing that I did, I created some like certificates, and my sister and we just went down to New York City into Union Square, and we were, yeah, and so these are what they look like. Um and they've got um they got QR codes and everything.
Yeah.
And we were just went down to the city and went into Union Square, and I started talking to people and on the street, random strangers, and asking them if they like to read, and I'd hand these out. And then when we got tired of standing, we went and sat at a restaurant, and my sister was like, go to that person. I'd get up from the table because we were sitting outside, and just engage people in, because I don't think that, I mean, I know within the field there's been a lot done to change engagement with Shakespeare and race, but I still get students who come into my classroom and have no idea that we can talk about Shakespeare and race. And so that tells me that there's more work that needs to be done on a more general scale.
Yeah.
And so, and even some of the people that I talk to on the street were like, Shakespeare and race, and I'm like, yes. And so, you know, that Cambridge made these like really nice posters for me about the book, and so I gotta go back. I am going back, but posted a couple of those up on like in the street in New York again. And
Are those
also,
printable? Is there any place where it's on, like in a PDF or printable?
yeah, it is.
All right. Well, we'll communicate on that.
Okay.
I'll throw that out around Tokyo a bit.
Okay,
Or
awesome.
at least English speaking, or my people here in the Shakespeare Society.
Well, thank
A
you.
meeting coming up.
And I'm also just really interested in doing local stuff. So my dad's a school bus driver. My sister is an elementary school teacher. And so they've handed out certificates to people that they work with. And because my dad, like I have one of my dad's coworkers, Lauren, she used to drive me to school when I was in elementary. And so for her to see me now as, you know, Shakespeare professor or somebody who's written a book, like she wants this book. She wants to sign it. She wants people to know about it because, again, that's why in my acknowledgments, I thank the teachers that educated me, but I also thank the school bus drivers that got me to school safely, because if they didn't, I wouldn't be here, and neither would this book. And so that to me is just as important as, say, somebody like, I don't know, the professors that I had at Trinity. Every person who has been a part of my path has some significant influence, even if there are people who don't think that influence is significant. I do. I'm also going to join a book festival coming up in Hartford, Connecticut. So home of Trinity, but there's a book festival happening where they tend to get a lot of traffic. Again, my book is sort of situated between academic and trade. So I think that's one of the reasons why doing these sort of non-traditional things makes a bit of sense, because my hope is that the book is something, well, again, actually, I shouldn't even say it's a hope, because my dad has read the book. And so I wrote a book that I wanted my parents to be able to read.
Right.
And because that is the truth, I'm pretty certain that most people who pick up the book would be able to take something from it. I'm also going to do a little event at the library here in my hometown. And so just really trying to do like local stuff. I have also embraced pink and orange because those are my book colors. So I have, although I think I'm gonna have to retire them because they don't really work that well for the fall. But yeah, no, I've got my nails of pink and orange, and I love the color combination.
Well, pumpkins are orange.
That's true. But see, I didn't, because you know what happened with the pink? People thought it was Barbie, and I'm like, no, it is my book. And so orange is going to be Halloween, and then we might get mixed marketing there. So I have to think about this, unless it's yeah, I'll have to think about this. But I didn't. Yeah, orange. I did think yes, but then I realized Halloween is coming, and I certainly don't want to step on Christmas's toes in any kind of way. So I will let pink or red and green and white do their thing in December. But yeah, no, just been really having fun with anything. When my sister went to the city with me, she had on a beautiful orange dress. And my family has sort of embraced these colors. So it's been kind of a unifying thing. But doing promo differently, for me, has meant just, I guess, being out amongst people, just regular everyday people, and not so much thinking about the academic world as much, which is a world that I care about. But of course, those are the people who are going to know about the book. Whereas I'm trying to reach audiences that maybe won't hear about it unless they hear about it from me.
Right. No, that's what you have to do. And I like it how you get out there in the physical world, and not rely entirely on the internet or whatever, social networking, which is also very useful too. And the people who contact me in this series very often are people who are not academic, who and who follow. So you're right. It isn't just people within the academy or in our group, in our specialty. And I just think that's wonderful stuff that you're doing. I wanted to mention here, I want to go back to your life a bit. You mentioned your father, and we've talked a little bit about Gaffney, but I wanted to make sure that we got out that you're going to be organized. You've organized with Arthur Little, Dempna Callahan, and Catherine Gillen, a panel for the Shakespeare Association of America meeting 2024 in Portland in April of 2024. In Plain Sight is the title. In Plain Sight, Whiteness in Shakespeare Studies. I wanted to, Dempna probably doesn't remember me, but we were both at a Marlowe conference at the University of Cambridge in another century. In the mid 90s. I just had a book come out, and she was still early in her career and so forth. But and also mentioned to Dempna that David McGinnis has praised her beyond the heavens as a teacher and a mentor. Right. And of course, I think there's some mentorship in here with Arthur Little and these people. I do want to just make mention of how important this mentorship is to people in our profession, both being one and both receiving the help of others. It's so helpful when you can get good feedback and support, because it could get lonely out there.
It can get lonely, and I would actually say, good mentorship, and great mentorship. And I'm lucky that I have been able to have great mentors, but it's the key to survival in this profession, and maybe the world, but certainly in this profession.
Yeah, certainly is. So there's the SAA panel. I have been asked to participate in the digital panel that Don Rodriguez is doing. But I had to put in 4 choices, so I put my name in to that panel so I remember it. And I don't think I'll be able to make it to Portland, but.
Because how long would that take you to get to Portland from Tokyo?
It's not that far. It was 9 hours, 9 or 10 hours.
Okay.
That's a jumper flight for us, but it's the timing of it. We start a semester and have orientations and so forth, and I'm on committees where they want my body on campus. Gotcha. And I haven't given up on it yet, but I'm gonna. I'm not.
Well, it would be nice to meet you in person in real life one day.
Yes, it surely would. It surely would be so nice. But let's go into your background. Some of our speakers are really, don't like to talk about their background as much for various reasons and good reasons. But you have so much of your life in your book toward the end of Shakespeare's White Others. And we talked about this before. I wanted to be also very specific about that specific circumstance. When you're 17, 18 years old, people went to war. They went to war at that age, and fought with troops and were shot at. I mean, so they're considered old enough to get shot at and killed. And so there you are, a young man who's just been accepted into an elite college, I feel, and you're high on life. And right there at that time, here come these cops to start messing with you. You know, it's all that I can tell. So could you go into a little bit more specific detail, like you're 17-year-old David Sterling Brown, and you're driving, is that right? You're driving a car.
Yeah,
And
driving
you're being pulled over near where
on my
you
little
live.
street.
Yeah, for an infraction that is not really an
That's
infraction.
not correction. Yeah. So, and I guess the um real sort of key point in that story is so my dad had just bought me my first car. And it was, it wasn't like a Mercedes or anything like that, but it was a brand new car. It was a Hyundai Sonata, and it was
That's a
pearl
good
white.
car.
And so yeah, it was a new car, and I was a young guy, and at the time, my hair was back when I had hair, my hair was longer, and so I would often wear it in braids, so cornrows, and I'd sometimes wear a do-rag, so very much fitting in, I guess, optically in my environment.
Yeah.
And in, I think, 1998, my street, so we're talking about a few years before these incidents were even happening, my street was turned from a two-way street into a one-way entry, which means you can only enter in one direction, but you can exit out of either. See, you're shaking your head because you seem to get it without needing to like look at a diagram and all that stuff.
I can see. Yeah.
And so, I got pulled over 4 times in, I think it was within 6 months, by 3 different police officers for this infraction. And the last one really scared me because none of the officers were kind when they stopped me. And
Yeah.
I had the talk, and if people don't know what the talk is, it's a talk that Black parents have to have with their children about how to engage with police officers. So it's,
Yeah.
yes, sir, like upping up all the politeness that you can. And I was well aware of things like, Rodney King and other moments of racial violence that had happened. And I did not want that to
Yeah, don't reach quickly for the glove compartment.
don't reach
Very,
quickly
very
for anything,
carefully,
answer questions. But, what was really fascinating to me was just the way that the police officers were invalidating different aspects of my existence.
Yeah.
So
All of
that's
them were white. They were all white.
not, I think one of them might have been, well, actually, I guess technically, yes. Yes. One of them
Okay.
might have been biracial, but they were invalidating my existence in different ways. Like, when one of the last cops, she asked for the license and registration, which I had and I gave her. But she also asked me whose car it was. Now, my dad bought me this car. My name was on the bill of sale for logistical and practical reasons. My name was not on the I think it was the registration, because then I'd have that does stuff with insurance and all of that. So I'm trying to think smart and economically. And when she looked at the registration and saw, my dad's name, she then tells me it's not my car. And so I was like so confused by that, because I'm like, well, I went with my dad. I signed the paperwork, like, it's my car. But again, because of the talk, you don't get into debates with police officers. So she tells me it's not my car, it's not my car. And that's what I had to walk away from that situation thinking, or believing, because she's the law, right? And not only that, but she gave me a ticket that I then had to take time out of my high school morning to go to court and fight. And so, because once a police officer writes a ticket, they can't just take it back.
No, they can't.
And so I learned a lot at that young age about just both engaging with police officers, but also how the law works or doesn't work, or who it works for. Because, as I mentioned in this talk, I went to school with really rich white kids who did, like, I had a friend in high school, underage drinking, backed his truck into a police car. And because there was a party happening, and did not, I'm sure, end up with the trauma that I dealt with for many years, because it took me about 17 years, to be quite honest, to finally get over that. I used to have so much anxiety being around police, and anybody who's been around me and has been around me in the presence of police will know that I tended to want to just not be present in those moments. And so it wasn't until 2017 that I actually really started dealing with that. And part of that was therapy. Part of it was honestly having to manage my anxiety with medication, because it was really bad. Like,
Yeah.
to the point of not panic attacks, but definitely unable to stay present with my own thoughts and feelings, because I would get so distracted and afraid by the presence of a badge.
Yeah, because this unlocks something. This
Yeah,
unlocks the gate, and then
yeah,
it's that those cops become every cop, and
basically.
it's oh, it's almost Hamlet. His mother becomes every woman, you know.
Yeah,
But that is such a, and you can't. It's perfectly human. It is. I think all of us have experienced something in that arena, but the terror of being so close to home. I think that's one
that's
of the,
right.
you're
Terror. Yeah,
so close to home. You're not in a conflict zone across the world.
right.
You're not in another place where you go, okay, I'm glad to get out of here and go home.
And
You
I can't, you
here
know?
you are home. Here you are home. You
Yep.
might as well be standing in your front yard. All right.
Yeah.
So here's the difference. I talked about that at Pomona, California, in the cop story. Once they saw us, you know, guy said, I got a foreigner over here in the passenger side from Yugoslavia. And he said, I got another foreigner. He's from South Carolina. I had a South Carolina driver's license. So it's a joke. And both of the cops they were so relaxed that they were not getting into a gunfight, right? They were apologetic. They were nice to us. And they said, and they talked to us, right?
Mhm.
Okay, we made a mistake. We're sorry. We're not terrible guys, but we're trying to keep this area safe. So I leave with a completely different impression of
Yeah.
the police than you do, right?
Oh, yeah.
And
I mean, for years, I would not exit my street in the way that it was legally correct, because
yeah,
I just didn't want to put myself in a position of perhaps having that happen again.
yeah.
And so for years, I guess inconvenienced myself, because sometimes it would have been easier to go left, but I always went right because
Yeah.
I just couldn't deal with the possibility.
There is a possibility. All right. And that's something that is not felt in so much of the world, that just a routine, just going down to the store to get some milk, something you forgot when you're shopping or whatnot,
Yep.
just a routine visit, drive down the street could turn into something. And then after that, following that, you know, you have the whole history of with just, you know, there's a canon of stories, very unhappy with Trayvon Martin and
Yep.
Ed Alia. But the thing is that to live with that kind of fear. Now, the thing is, you were in a neighborhood that was not safe, but you felt reasonably safe in your section of your neighborhood. Is that right? That
Oh, yeah, always. I mean, because I grew up here, so I mean, I didn't know anything different, you know.
yeah,
So for me, it was, and we're talking about 2001, 2002. I would say in the late 80s, early 90s, as I mentioned in the book, that was when there was more sort of gang violence because of the crack epidemic and all that happening.
yeah.
By 2000, yeah, by the turn of the century, wow. But yes, turn of the century, things were, I think, more stable.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, I'm Shakespeare teacher, and I'm not a sociologist, but there, the efforts there have been, say, in my hometown, to preserve old buildings, right? And
Mhm.
statues are another thing, you know. But some old buildings to make your hometown nice and charming and so forth, and and not segregated, right? Integrated and a happy place. That's so hard to do. Yet
Yes.
what seems to never go away is that guy, right? That it could be one or two out of 10, it could be one or two out of 100, but what never goes away is that guy who's born with racial hatred that you recognized in those old men when I was a child, right? That they were carrying, and you go, where I just don't see how this doesn't die, right?
It's
Because
taught.
I wasn't like those guys. I didn't. I saw it. My friends, we weren't perfect in probably that regard, but there was another step along the way. It's the same guy. It's the same angry white guy,
Yeah,
and
it's
I don't understand it.
it's learned behavior, and I think it's taught, and I think we see this in Shakespeare's plays. Like, in that scene in Act Four, or no, not Act Four, Scene Two, but Act Three, Scene Two, with the fly scene in Titus Andronicus, right?
Uh-huh.
They're having this moment where they're stabbing this fly, and this black fly, the ill-favored fly, and they're Titus and his brother are sort of seeing it as a representation of Aaron. There are children in that scene. They're not really participants in that moment, but they're observing. So what do they
Uh-huh.
learn? And so we learn things in the subtlest ways, and these things get transferred because there are vehicles to keep the hatred and the racism and the sexism and all the isms moving forward.
Yeah, yeah. You see, I have to believe that there has been progress and that continues to move in the right direction. But the thing is that when you move like I have, when you're expatriated and so forth, and you see people, you have children and so forth, everything can be wiped out in one generation, and
Yeah.
that is the bad. Well, I'm sorry, that's an absolute. I hate absolutes. You can wipe out a lot in one generation, and you can wipe out a lot of bad, and you can wipe out also a lot of good.
Mm-hmm.
You can just whatever reboot, and you're back in it. It's something even worse than Jim Crow or whatnot.
Yeah.
So just generationally, it's just and like it's so hard. It's such a burden
It
on
is.
the oppressing class to keep that. You wonder, why would you spend that much time, those
Right.
resources, those physical and emotional, that your whole body involved every day of your life in oppressing people? It's
Yeah.
just unbelievable.
It is like a sadistic commitment to just because there's a lot of effort that takes. It's a lot of
Yeah.
effort, and that's why I say when it comes to these types of disparities in our society, whether it's with race or gender or sexuality or whatever, nobody wins because even the oppressor is affected, even
Oh,
if
it's
they
so
do
it's so hard, and I can't help but think that at some point, maybe the point of ignition is self-loathing, uh,
yeah.
and the self-loathing may come from the racism, you
I
know,
actually
in
say
a
that.
loop, right?
I
Yeah.
say that
Okay.
in
Yeah,
one
you
of my
do.
pieces for Los Angeles. Was it no Los Angeles Review of Books? Might be. Um, but I say that it's a form of self-hatred. It really is.
Yeah. Nothing different. And it's in a loop, right? Because the hatred can come from the racism feeds the hatred feeds the self-hatred. It's just, you could almost draw a kind of loop. Well, you are very big. I didn't know this, but you were not in a good spot when I spoke to you 2 years ago. You were having some personal struggles, and not just
Was
your
I?
career was. It looked to me like your career was going just fine, but rest and mental health. Okay, so I
Yes.
I'm big on both of those things.
I am laughing because I was totally neglecting myself back then and I refuse to do it now. But yeah, when I finished talking to you last time, shortly after that, I had to get a blood transfusion. And I did not realize how bad my health was because I think I was too distracted by everything that I was doing. And so I learned a hard lesson then not to just overcommit and overwork myself. So that was definitely yeah, that was an interesting time.
I have colleagues now, I think, who contact some, not me, but other people about things because they want to send out an email on Sunday. And some years ago, I said, well, we can talk about what our religious backgrounds are or whatnot, but basically, I teach the Bible as one of our classes, and it's a actually it's E.D. Hurst. It's cultural literacy. It's Western. I teach it more or less as Western thought. Like you need to know these stories in order to communicate with me. But anyhow, this whole business of resting one day a week, and and the punishment is death. I mean, it was that severe because you know how people are. They'll get out there and start working, and you're going to rest because God rested on the seventh day. Well, I don't know. You know, people have different seventh days, but you have to have the day of rest, and that day happens to be my Sunday.
Okay.
And I have made it very clear to students and colleagues. You can send emails anytime you want. You're not getting anything back from me on Sunday. I'm off the grid. And you just, cause I remember working, I had a summer job at a plant. We did frozen meals. It was a chicken plant. We slaughtered 90 tons of chicken a day in that place. But I'd say I was not really I was just a lowly worker. But I worked 28 days straight because I was trying to make money. And at one point I thought, you know, I'm coming unglued from a certain kind of reality that right. So that's where you were on that 28-day straight every day. And you're in the life of the mind, you see, which makes it, see, I could clock out, but.
Yeah. So you got to have boundaries and be committed to them because, when I was working for Teach for America after I graduated from Trinity, there were times when I'd have to work 65 to 80 hours a week. And that was a lot then, but I managed it. But also I was like 23 and not that I'm not saying, you know, being almost 40 is like, oh, but your body changes and what you can handle at 23 is not the same as what you can handle at 38 or 39. And so I really had to take stock of that, but also recognizing how just the challenges, like my grandmother, she became ill during the pandemic when it started, and her health, thank God she's still with us, but her health, you know, certainly declined. And so having to prioritize my family, she's now, like, our relationship has changed. I talk to her basically every day, and that means I need time to be able to do that. And that's more important to me than answering some email. And so this may be a sort of announcement for people, but there are people who are probably waiting to hear from me right now in terms of emails. But I just had to figure out what matters, because I also felt like when I don't know, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, but when the pandemic started and everybody, it almost seemed like people, because we weren't able to connect in other ways, like the work just kept happening even through the summer. And then once, you know, we sort of moved back into in person, that mentality kind of continued, even though we sort of went back to where we were before as far as in person is concerned. But those two things for me can't really coexist, right? Because if I'm home every single day of the week because the government says we can't go outside, then I really don't have anything else to do. But once life resumed in, you know, the ways that it is now, I don't see what's been happening as sustainable. So, like, I have a clause in my syllabus and I tell my students after, I think it's, I don't know, 6 or 7 p.m. on Friday, if they send me an email after that, great, I will get back to you on Monday. And because no one else's crisis is my crisis. That's how I have to operate in that way.
I think that's great advice. It really is great advice. And I think that I was just seeing complete parallels with what you were saying about the pandemic. In my case, too close to the refrigerator. A lot of good things happen around the refrigerator, a lot of bad things. And there's food. There might be a cold beer in there. There might be something I usually enjoy when I can go to work and then be away from work. But when you're at home the whole time, it all starts running together.
Yes.
And so I had to strongly commit, you know, like make these almost religious commitments that, you know, don't open that door until a certain time, you know, and in fact, during that period, I just completely quit drinking. Well, I know it wasn't because I was a strong man or anything. It's like, it's going to be either that or something bad. And now that I'm out and around, and I realize that those separations of duties and so forth, that's all part of a balanced sort of mental health, a life
Yeah.
that's mentally healthy. I did kind of want to talk about the grandmother, the Southern grandmother, because we are in racial history. We have the Great Migration that happened, from Reconstruction on out to of Black people moving north. There were better
Yep.
jobs. You were better positioned. You were in a less racially hostile area, immediately hostile. There were still plenty of people who didn't want you maybe on their side of town or whatnot. But there has been also a movement back to the South in recent years, or at least more the metropolitan South. And I recently saw a podcast a few years ago now, I think, Imani Perry at Princeton, and who is from Alabama. But she talked about the two qualities of racial relations in the South, kind of more now. Intimacy was one word, and armistice was another word. She used those key words, intimacy and armistice. And it hit me because one of the good things about social networking, you see, we could not be in touch with the people we went to high school with. And I went to an integrated high school, 3,000 people, it was majority Black. And there was people that I was in sports with and band with and class with and so forth. And you lose track of each other. And 30 years later, you find you really, really want to know what happened to, and they want to know what happened to you. And there's this closeness that you go, I don't have with, I wonder why we feel so close. We didn't have the advantage of being able to go to each other's house. We didn't have the advantage of really being friends who hung out, who went to places together. Yet this intimacy developed. And then when things break down, I have seen and heard from a few of my friends who have said things, God bless them, they just don't know, they don't know how that might be hurtful to the person they're talking to. And that's the armistice, where, Ricky might say, listen, you're in another world and we're not going to go there. Let's continue talking about, I don't know, football or something. And, where we have a huge amount of overlap in the team we like and so forth. But I would like to see more of those positive things, more the ability to walk away, walk away from those cops. They may represent a much larger institution, but there got to be some good cops out there somewhere, and they have to be. And I still believe that we are on the good side of things. If we stay together and don't beat up on each other, my goodness, we beat up on ourselves enough,
Yeah, you do. And I mean, I think one of the things for me too with the pandemic, like when it started, and I just at one point I had to retreat because there was just we were being inundated with so much stuff, and it became hard to even just sleep at night because
it's horrible.
Worry about is the pandemic, there's the protests in the street, there's people dying like every day. It was a lot. And so I think kindness actually that's what's on my mug that I got from this pool.
Just be
kinder than necessary. It's so impactful, and it's so much easier, I think, to be kind than not be. And I've been almost hypersensitive to negativity lately because I literally shrunk my world and just spent so much time especially on Twitter. Like people say Twitter or whatever they call it now, but people say Twitter is like just a mess. But I actually curated I don't know, like a Twitter world that is kind of a happy place for me, to be quite honest.
That's interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And I've heard a lot about this. My way of managing Twitter is to stay off of it, because I'm certain after a glass or two of one of those, I'm going to say something and the joke will not be gotten or intentionally. But you can create, and I've heard of people doing this. You can create a better world on your net, and that's transferable into your life.
Yes, it is. Like there's positive vibes and positive messages. I follow a lot of mental health practitioners who say things that make people think. I'm also now more sensitive to I don't know, tweets that might be like backhanded jokes or compliments, and so I'm less likely to maybe like or retweet it because I don't want to be part of spreading, that kind of, I don't
Yeah.
know, I don't want to call it negativity, but it's just, if it's not adding joy to somebody's day, then what good is it?
What good is it? That's what good is it? Well, I do remember even feeling guilty for feeling somewhat traumatized. Say, here I am. I'm not sick. I have a good job. I'm still getting paid, and and there are people out there who are dying. We know people who did, and so what is my right to talk about my trauma? And I think recently we have all started talking about this. You know why? We can go out after work or something. You can sit down and say, looking back, it got us too. To a not to the same degree, and still walking around, but. That's it. And you are in what we are hoping is post-pandemic, and hope we never see one again. But you know, well, what I'm going to do is ask you if you wouldn't mind staying a little bit after we talk, to debrief a little bit, and
Sure.
If you have anything else you want to put out there, I would be delighted to hear.
Nothing I can think of. I mean, I'm like looking at the agenda here, and I think we covered everything.
We got it, and a good conversation too. This is what I'd hoped more of, really, in this series.
Thank you for having me back. I really appreciate it.
I'm delighted. I'm delighted. I'm delighted you came on to begin with, David, because I was thinking, I wonder what that guy's. I saw a talk that you gave for Trinity. I think it was part of the program you mentioned, and I said I like that guy. I like that guy. It was just this good, strong, positive voice, and I just contacted you, and I'm sure. It's this guy, some fella, in Japan. What is it? Who is this fella? And you agreed to come on, and so that was the beginning of a wonderful friendship, and it's going to last, I hope, for years to come.
Yes, I'll see you again in 2 years.
Well, if we can keep this up, I'll be happy to do it as long as I'm alive and cognizant of still read books and process things.
Does your audience know how this works and how you are able to keep this alive?
I do. I tell them at the beginning of every program, Miss Grant, the grant will run out at some point. So I'll have to figure out how to have to go out and beg and borrow maybe a little bit, and maybe cut back a little bit on the number of talks we put out, and maybe not. Maybe it'll rain again. So we'll see. David, thank you so much for joining us again today. You're always welcome. You are a friend of the program, and you can come on if you just wanted to do something for 5 or 10 minutes. I'll be very happy to put it up out there and send it to.
Good to know.
And that goes for anybody here. I wish I could talk with everybody. I really, really do. We don't have enough money to do that, and I don't have enough time to do it. I have to read full books to pay respect to these people who have worked so hard, including you. Thank you so much again. And
thank you so much. And thanks to everybody who tunes in and listens.
Okie dokie. Bye-bye.